Welcome, stranger. My thanks to you.
For 3 long years, Ethan Collins felt the ghost of his own false accusation trailing him like a parched shadow across every fence line and cattle trail of his sprawling Arizona ranch. The memory of standing before the townsfolk and publicly blaming the nearby Apache band for cattle rustling, only to have the real outlaws caught months later gnawed at his conscience with the persistence of a coyote scratching at a coffin lid. He had never returned to that Apache camp to utter the simple words, "I was wrong," and that unspoken apology became a stone in his chest that grew heavier with each passing season of silence and self-reproach. Friends warned him that riding into the desert to seek forgiveness from a people he had slandered was a fool's errand that might rekindle old hatreds, or worse, get him killed in the unforgiving emptiness where law meant nothing and memory meant everything. Yet Ethan saddled his horse at dawn with a determination that surprised even himself, little knowing that the journey to cleanse his soul would instead ignite a love so profound it would weave together 2 worlds that had been torn apart by fear and misunderstanding for far too many bitter years. If you believe that a single heartfelt apology can rewrite the destiny of an entire community, then smash that like button and subscribe to West Old Stories Official so you never miss a frontier tale of redemption and unexpected grace. The desert welcomed him with a blistering sun that turned the horizon into shimmering illusions, and by the time he spotted the Apache camp nestled in a canyon where a hidden spring whispered against ancient stone, his throat was as raw as his remorse. The chief, a man whose face was etched with both sorrow and a curious serenity, stepped forward from the circle of tippus and studied Ethan with eyes that seemed to bore past flesh and bone straight into the rancher's trembling, hopeful heart. Ethan dismounted, removed his hat, and let his words tumble out without any rehearsed dignity, confessing that he had been blind, arrogant, and terribly wrong, and that he expected no forgiveness but simply needed to speak the truth before he could ever call himself a decent man again. A long silence draped over the camp like a blanket woven from centuries of betrayal, until the chief nodded slowly and replied that the courage to kneel before a wronged neighbor was rarer than gold in these harsh lands, and that the camp would welcome him as a guest, not an enemy. That evening, beneath a canopy of stars so thick they looked like spilled salt across black velvet, Ethan sat at the communal fire and felt the icy wall around his heart begin to melt as elders shared stories and children laughed without a trace of the hatred he had once helped sow. It was then that he first noticed Apache, the chief's niece, moving among the people with a quiet grace that seemed to calm the very air. Her dark eyes met his for just a heartbeat, and something unspoken passed between them that neither could name, but both would remember until their final days. Apache was known not only for her skill in healing with desert herbs, but for a wisdom that belied her young years, and when she finally spoke to Ethan, her voice carried neither malice nor a naive trust, but a measured curiosity about the man who had ridden across the barren earth to shed his pride. He confessed to her that his ranch had prospered outwardly while his spirit had weathered inwardly, and she in turn shared that her people had learned to survive by guarding their hearts. Yet they also understood that forgiveness was a seed that must be planted even in the driest soil if anything was ever to bloom again. Over the following days, Ethan did not merely sit as a guest. He rolled up his sleeves and worked alongside the men repairing a corral and digging an irrigation channel, proving with sweat and blisters that his apology was not just words carried on the wind, but a commitment, etched into aching muscle and honest toil. Apache watched him labor under the relentless sun, and she began to see not an enemy or guilt-ridden supplicant, but a man of substance whose remorse had birthed a genuine humility that was as rare in any culture as a cool rain in the middle of a scorching August drought. Their conversations deepened into twilight walks along the canyon rim, where she taught him the Apache names for the constellations, and he described the hidden valleys where the best grazing grass grew, and with each shared word, the distance between their 2 worlds shrank until it was no wider than a finger's breadth. One evening, as a lone coyote sang its lonesome song to the rising moon, Ethan realized that his heart had been captured not by a dramatic revelation, but by 1,000 small, Quiet moments of watching a pony laugh with the children and tend to her grandmother with hands that were both gentle and strong. He told the chief that he had come seeking only to clear his conscience, but now he found himself reluctant to leave, and the old man smiled knowingly, remarking that the Great Spirit often hides the most precious gifts inside the very journeys we undertake for the most painful reasons. When the day of departure arrived, Ethan stood beside his horse with a heaviness that had nothing to do with guilt and everything, to do with the prospect of never again seeing the woman who had rearranged the furniture of his soul without ever lifting a finger. A pony approached him with something wrapped in soft deerskin, a necklace of turquoise and shell, and as she placed it around his neck, she whispered that this was not a goodbye, but an invitation for him to return when the next moon grew full and round in the indigo sky. Ethan rode away with the necklace resting against his heart and a promise burning in his chest, and the chief's parting jest that the rancher had come to collect forgiveness but was leaving with his niece's affection echoed behind him, like a prophecy he desperately hoped would come true. In the months that followed, Ethan traveled that desert trail so often that his horse could have navigated it blindfolded, and each visit deepened the bond between him and a pony until the very idea of living separate lives became as unthinkable as the desert blooming without a single drop of water. A pony's family saw the authenticity of his devotion and granted their blessing, and Ethan's own ranch hands, who had once shared the territory's blind prejudices, learned to respect a love that had been forged in the fire of accountability and cooled in the gentle waters of mutual reverence. Their wedding ceremony took place on the very spot where Ethan had first stammered his apology, with Apache drumming and settler fiddles blending into a single triumphant music that rose into the Arizona sky and announced to all creation that division had been conquered by a simple, stubborn, life-altering act of contrition. The union of Ethan and a pony sent ripples across the region, transforming their ranch into a sanctuary where Apache and settler families gathered for seasonal councils, shared agricultural wisdom, and celebrated births and harvests as one extended family under the same vast and accepting heavens. Children born of that marriage grew up bilingual and bicultural, fluent in the language of the land and the language of the heart, and they became living bridges who carried the legacy of their parents' unlikely romance into a future where old hatreds had no soil in which to take root. The chief, now an old man whose hair was as white as the moon he still greeted each night with prayer, often told the young ones that the greatest warrior was not the one who conquered enemies, but the one who conquered his own pride and rode alone into a camp armed only with the truth and a trembling hope. Decades later, when storytellers around campfires asked how a simple apology could birth such a sweeping transformation, Ethan would smile, touch the turquoise still hanging around his weathered neck, and reply that the desert had taught him that the most fertile ground is always found in the place where your own heart has been broken open. A pony, ever the healer, added that forgiveness is not a single act, but a daily practice, like tending a garden that must be watered with patience and protected from the weeds of old resentment that always try to creep back when the world grows dark and cold. The ranch they built together became known as the crossroads of the two winds, and even after both had passed into the spirit world, travelers reported feeling an inexplicable warmth when they passed the old homestead, as if the love that had been born there still radiated from the very adobe bricks and sun-bleached timbers. So the tale of the rancher who went to apologize and left with a bride became a treasured heirloom of the Old West, a story that proved the frontier was not merely a stage for conflict, but a crucible where the human capacity for change could shine brighter than any polished silver spur or engraved revolver. It reminds us all that no wrong is so deep that it cannot be reached by the outstretched hand of genuine remorse, and no chasm between peoples is so wide that it cannot be spanned by the humble bridge of love, when it is built with the sturdy timber of unwavering respect and tender daily devotion. If this extraordinary journey of redemption and unlikely romance has stirred your spirit, then honor that feeling by pressing the like button and subscribing to West Old Stories Official, where we bring the forgotten gems of frontier humanity back to brilliant, shining life every single week. Now ride down to the comments and share a moment when an apology changed your own life or the life of someone you love, because your voice is the living campfire that keeps these timeless stories burning bright across the ages. And we cherish every single word you share with our growing community.